Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove, which is the conversations portal for the new play development program at the Lucille Lortel Theater. My name is Caridad Svich. I am the artistic director of the Alcove new play program. And today in our series, we have the wonderful playwright, but also actor and director. We'll get to that soon in our interview, Lisa Sanaye Dring. And I will tell you a little bit. I'll start with a brief audio description, but also where I'm beaming in from. So I'm beaming in from the land of the Lenape. And audio description wise, I am a fair-skinned person with, at the moment, I think it's like golden brownish hair. Sometimes it's reddish brown, depending on what I do with it. I have it sort of in a ponytail to one side. I have bangs. I'm wearing red lipstick. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing sort of cat eyeglasses that have a little bit of tortoiseshell rim on them. And my top, you might see some of it, is red and black checks, very kind of holiday-like, although it's not the December holidays, but I had a feeling of wearing this today. My background is a white background. You might see in one corner, depending on where I'm leaning, a lamp, a tall lamp that is turned on at the moment, but you may or may not see it, depending on that. All that aside, to say, Lisa, who is on my other side of the screen, is a writer, director, and actor, originally from Hawaii and Reno, Nevada, something I did not know. See, the wonderful things can happen in Nevada. She's been nominated for an Emmy for her work as a writer and director, and is currently the Tow Foundation Resident Playwright with Mayi Theater Company. If you don't know Mayi, wonderful company based in New York, championing new writing, new ways of making things, just visionary. I love them so much. I'm such a fan. Some of Lisa's plays include SUMO, which, yes, is about sumo wrestling, and it premiered at the Jolla Playhouse as in collaboration with Mayi Theater. We'll get to talking about that soon. Also, Kairos, which is on a rolling world premiere currently. Am I right about that, Lisa? Yeah, still currently, and many other plays. They're also a screenwriter, director, obviously, actor, and all around mover shaker in the world. Lisa, welcome. And if you'd like to tell us where you're beaming in from and any other things.
Yes. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm on Lenape land as well. I've got like hair that's a little longer than shoulder length. It's brown. And then I have blonde ends. I'm half Japanese American, so I'm tan-ish. I am wearing a beige sweater with black polka dots on it, and I have a kind of a background full of things. I have a mirror behind me, and also like a beautiful window, and just like sort of a background full of stuff.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, the first question that I always ask in this series is related to the climate crisis. And so I start by asking, how is currently, since we're in it, the climate crisis affecting your art making, your practice, the way you're thinking about form, material, elements, ways of doing things in your artwork?
That's a great question. I'm on like my second try of a play that encounters this directly. And it's funny, I don't know how you feel, but I'll write a play and then I'll be like, does anyone want it? Nope. Okay. And I'll put it aside and be like, no, I guess not. And then I'll just write the, next play. So the first play I tried has recently been getting some traction, which is really nice. It was an honorable mention at Bay Area Playwrights Festival, so I'll be reading a little bit of it. And then last year I did it as a student production at Cal Arts. But I developed that with Circle X Theater in LA, and that was about these Japanese American women and sort of these celestial bodies of Japan that were femme-bodied, that were all speaking together through timelines. So one timeline was 1945, one was 2045, and one was the celestial ever present. And 2045 was dealing with climate collapse in a more severe way than we are now. 1945 was about these two women who had become lovers while their husbands were away at war during World War II that were about to encounter the atomic bomb. And then the celestial ever present were like their guardians who were trying to let these women out before the decimation occurred, before this event that was about decimation. And even though they were going to die essentially and come up to greet their people, the idea was that they had to get them out before there was hopelessness, before everything was gone. And I'm interested in this idea. Jonathan Lear wrote about radical hope. It's like, what is, he wrote about the Crow people when their entire way of being collapsed. And granted, I think there's some colonialist lens on this, but it's like, how do we hope for a future that we can't yet hope for because of our situation? So how do we create the conditions for a future generation to hope for something that's beyond my current worldview that I can't possibly believe in right now? So it's like, how do you deal with cultural collapse? And so that play happened, but then I was like, oh no, there's another, like, I'm trying to get at more. So right now, I'm writing a play called Golden Record Club with MTS Theater, also in LA. And the Golden Record of the 70s, where Carl Sagan sent this bishop with like a record of humanity, was an act of hope, was like, hey, if someone's out there, maybe they want to meet us. Noise coming from me, by the way. I hear a background noise and I don't know what it is.
So I'm not hearing any background noise, so I think we're okay.
I think we're okay. Okay. So, but in this present, it's basically set in the present, set next year. There is another golden record, but it's about what happens after we humans are gone. So there are scientists and anthropologists right now who are trying to think about a record in a different way, especially like the things I've been reading about is about nuclear waste. So it's like, how do we leave signage for post-linguistic, yes, or at least language we can't right now understand. And so this new golden record will be about records left deep in the ground and also in satellites. For, if not a post-human, a post-human we know. So also to get on the golden record. It's now also more of an open field, meaning they're accepting submissions and you have to like compete to get on the golden record. And they're doing so by embodying an Okinawan ritual, a Shimanshu ritual of these women who were performing a ritual for the last time after Japanese imperialism. I know it's very like, this is a really dense setup. So I'm really working on it because there's some trickiness there. But basically, like, the essence of it is that these 17-year-olds who are trying to grow in the face of collapse, like they don't, how do you blossom in a moment of deep decay? And is it, there seems to be a feeling like the world is ending all the time, but now it feels, like there's no denying that this is a really critical point. And so they're essentially trying to apprentice from these elder women. They're like actually not elders, they're 40 when they would undergo this ritual, but they also had to embody the ritual in the 70s for the last time because there weren't enough Shimanshu people anymore because of colonialization, because they weren't allowed to speak their language or teach their language or practice their rituals. This was the last time they did it. And I think they probably knew that this was the last time. So how do you live out a sacred eternal right when eternity is confounded, when your entire way of being has all of a sudden a limit? And so those are the plays I'm trying to think of. In many ways, I'm trying to think of how past and future can heal one another and how we can learn from the past and how the past can, how we send information back and forth. And then I also think about, decolonizing and anti-capitalist ways of making work, not just in the subject matter, but how can we disrupt the rhythms of capitalism and imperialism in a broader way that I don't know many of those answers, but how can I make my work and the way I work and the spaces I help lead and am just in places where, hierarchical structures of power and verticality of power are in some ways troubled. So I'm trying to think about it more, but I also am so moved, like, I think about, I don't know this person, but Frances Cowhig, I don't think she takes planes anymore, right? She like doesn't, fly to go see her work or develop her work. She's, and I hope I'm not misquoting her life, but, I'm really moved by people who are embodying this struggle and this interest in these principles in a way that I find deeper than my own. And I'm trying to figure out how I can continually look at life. I was also, Caridad, we were actually in a talkback with UCSB like a year and a half ago, and you said something very beautiful about looking at climate catastrophe. You're like, also if you look into why, like, you're like, said something along the lines of, if I just look at what I'm interested in and what I want to write about, then maybe that also holds a key to these greater political ideas that I'm trying to get at. If we sort of go at what's the deepest thing in our souls as artists, then hopefully, depending on how honest and how much we get there, it can also help create change in ways that are more structural.
Yeah. A beautiful response. And I want to know more about all these plays now. And I'm super curious. And I think that, certainly the materials with which we work, and also the ways of working that need to be disrupted super fast, because we're, it feels a little bit like, I always joke with people who are outside of theater, who have no idea how any of it works, but I'll say to them, it's a really slow business. Like, it's really super slow. And I think it's slow on multiple levels. One, I think it's, I'm not saying anything out of school to say that I feel like theater is often like at least 20 years behind the other disciplines in terms of like how it's approaching, how it's thinking about, listen, that we're still having discussions in theater about abstraction, I think is absurd, because it's a given, do you know what I mean? It's like, in the visual art world and music and like, everybody accepts that abstraction is a thing, and on we go. Like, and nobody is sort of talking about nonlinear as being, ooh, nonlinear is so weird, and I'm like, it's just a thing, it's just another way of seeing the world, and like, and so, but the fact that in theater, a lot of the times we get caught in these discussions that feel to me quite old, it says that we're very slow. But it's also literally the production time for a show to happen, if it ever happens. There's so much time in between the act of writing something, at the laptop, when you're working with actors eventually, et cetera, and moving that into a production experience. And at the same time, since we're living in an ending, we're living in extinction, I feel like it's also super important to kind of like work fast. You know what I mean? Like, in a sense that when people say, well, just wait a few years and we'll get to it. And it's like, but actually we don't have time. Actually, we don't have time to do that. So I hunger, like, one of the things I hunger for is for, like, I know there's so much fear in the industry right now, financially, there's so much that's strangling the industry, including the fact that we're in a country in the US that has no art subsidy of any kind, really, proper art subsidy. But, within that, I would say, why isn't every theater in the country committing, like, banding together and saying they're going to go green? Like, this could be like a very simple step. It means, rethinking again how you do things and blah, 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 blah. But that would be like an incredible statement, like, to actually, walk the walk, right, and do it. And yet and I was talking with someone that shall remain nameless, but and they were saying, well, we can't because commercially it's not viable. And I'm like, but dude, that's like short-term thinking. You know what I mean? That's not long-term thinking. And I feel like we're caught a little bit in our industry around precisely this problematic, hyper-individualist, neoliberal, short-term apparatus that's actually stopping us actually from evolving and growing and adapting. And I think that, maybe it needs to come from the artist, but I feel we just need to push back a lot and demand the organizations that we work with start, kind of walking the walk. One of the things that I do when I work with organizations is that I put it in my contract, like that the production be ecologically sustainable, for example, and I'm making that kind of a demand of the design. And at the very least, I feel like I can do that if I can affect that, and if it affects other productions that are happening at that venue, I feel like yay for everyone involved, and yay for the planet. So then I'm also rethinking about like what does a venue mean, and like how is one of the things that I love about digital theater is that there's problems with it ecologically, but one of the things I do love about it is that it brings the work to people. So it eliminates the travel, eliminates the kind of getting in the car and like getting on a plane, doing all of that. And I think that's one way of solving, lessening, the constant demand to go see work, and the pollution attached to that is very real. So it's just stuff I'm always thinking about, and I'm always trying to figure out the work. I wanted to look at Kairos in this regard, because I think of it as a climate crisis play, but I don't know if you do. That's just my own personal. But wondering how Kairos came to be. I know you're on a rolling world premiere with it, so by the time this airs, that premiere will be over. But hopefully the play will have more life. So I'm just wondering how your process has been thus far, the production end of it, but also like what inspired the play and all the good things.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I also want to say what you just said. I was like, wow, I would love to know what that ecologically sustainable like writer is and what that means for companies. I think that's a great idea. It's interesting being, me being like emerging, of being like, I don't often feel like I can pull weight. Because there's a thing that happens when you're early career, and I think I'm like kind of shifting into a place where I could ask for those things. But when you first start getting productions, you're like, thank you so much for having me. I don't need anything, right? And then you get to a point where you're like, oh wait, I have the sovereignty to stand up for the people in this room that need to be stood up for, and the things that need to be stood up for. So I'm like taking notes right now on things I could, possibly do as I hopefully grow and evolve in this field. Kairos. It is in many ways like, because Kairos means in the Greek sense, right timing. It's like synchronicity, it's seasons, it's this cyclical feeling, and it's luck. Like they used to give at the first Olympics, they had like a little altar for Kairos, because the idea was that all these Olympians were perfect, but like just right timing, luck, the fates had to be with you as you shot your arrow. And so in that way, it isn't, because in capitalism, we think about linear time, we think about growing, expanding, ever expanding, go, go, go. And these people in the play are, I should tell you what the play's about. It's about two people who are falling in love at the advent of immortality. So they're falling in love. They're in their first season of love. They're in limerence as they're like, oh, are we going to live forever? And are we going to do that together? So in a way, it is actually like the sort of pulse of it, which is critique on capitalism and critique on this like grow, 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 ever, ever, ever going, is very, I think, covert in it. But like there's a tree that, and I love every production has done a different iteration of a tree, what that means. But like, as these people are going through there's a tree that goes through seasons and decays. And I think, one of the characters has a serious alchemical shift in them because of loss, because of decay. And they realize what is, I think, like a wisdom practice, is understanding in some ways that relenting that happens, that is part of meaning making, that is part of life, even though it is a painful part. And in that way, I do think, I think about this as an artist, we're always pushed to like make, but there's a thing about being fallow, and there's a thing about receiving, and there's a thing about not expanding. And like if our society, if our economic system had interest in this or even touched this, then I don't think we'd be in this, the chaos that is ensuing because of this ever expansion, because of this more mentality. But that is like, that's that theme. And so this play, yes, two people are at the beginning of their love, and then about 3 months in, it's like, whoa, this world shift happens. And I was thinking about this in 2021. I was listening to NPR, and there was an article on anti-senescent technology, which is in my play in a slightly altered way than it is existing in real life. So right now they're giving rats shots, and they slough off old cells, and the rats, their skin or their fur becomes more lustrous, and they're more curious, and they're younger, essentially. They have more energy. And so the idea is in 15, 20 years, we will be getting shots like this, right? And who knows which of us will be getting that. But this anti-aging technology is moving quickly. And so in this play, the Otway snail like slime, which is a real thing, which I didn't know it was a real thing when I was writing it. I was like, snail slime, it's like an anti-aging thing. And then now it's real. They basically developed this technology further and further that it creates immortality so that you can just sort of freeze your body at a certain time. And then they have to deal with the ramifications of that. And it's a little different, like, it's a speculative fiction, but it's not as interested in world building as it is in the interpersonal and personal dynamics that occur because of great shifts in society. So I listened to this podcast and I was thinking about it, and I pitched it to the Geffen as when I was applying to their writer's room. And I was also thinking about pandemic relationships, right? Like being sort of at the beginning of love with someone during a sea change in the world and what that does to your relationship. And I was also thinking, this is very nerdy, but senex is the Jungian archetype for old man in Latin. And it's the opposite of the puer puella, the Peter Pan. And so there's like a Jungian chart of 12 archetypes, and like there you have your opposite. And so thinking about wisdom and old age as this opposite of this ever young, ever, blossoming one. And there's beauty in the Peter Pan type, but there's also like the Peter Pan gets energy because they have not fulfilled a destiny, because they live in the potential of like it could always happen, but they resist making something happen because in embodying your life, there is a loss of the things you could have been. And so I think for me at this change, and there's a plot twist, which is that the technology is only available for people under 35, because at a certain point, you don't have enough young cells, it would become fatal. And I wrote this like, I started writing this as I entered my 30s and was like, oh no, there's like a shift coming. And I'm living through that shift of being like, okay, I'm feeling just energetic in me, like something changing, but there is something lost in that way. And so, yeah, I was curious about all these things.
Yeah, and so in the production, and so it premiered in Cincinnati at No Theater. It just had a production. By the time this airs, it will be more time has passed, but it had a production at East West Players and Los Angeles. The next one production is, remind me, Michigan. Am I right?
Theater Nova in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and so I wonder. So your two productions back to back with National New Play Network as a rolling world premiere. So how has that been in terms of the development of the script? Also, the different design experiences and actor. It's a two-hander. So how those two different actors in each show kind of responded to the text and the director as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and it is my first. I'm getting a second production. I'm starting to get second productions coming up, but this is my first second production and third. So that's amazing. And also I'm learning so much. So, I mean, not to brag on the Lortel, but the Lortel helped fund the first workshop. And the thing I think, I feel this even more coming from LA theater, and I love LA theater. Like I've been, doing, jobs on many levels in LA theater and working with a lot of 99-seat theater companies since I graduated college. And I also, in encountering like the regional space more and how much money, frankly, there is for workshopping, you realize how hard it is for a non-New York writer to break into a national scene because we don't have the resources to get a play to like here. Like there's so many really, and that's also why Barry Playwrights Festival and the O'Neill and Seven Devils, that's why they're so wonderful. But often plays need more workshops than that, right? I'm like, there are 3 to 4 in many regional theaters before something gets a premiere, which, you know, you spend the entire budget on a show in LA before it gets to that space. And so in having this, in living with the script and being able to evolve it, starting with that workshop that I did with no theater, but with the support of the Lortel in December, I really feel like we're getting somewhere that could mean that this play hopefully becomes a map for many future productions. I mean, that is the dream, right? That you're not as present and you don't necessarily have to be present, that the script speaks enough that it's a map for production, for them to dream off of. And so what's beautiful in feeling the ride of multiple productions is like what's clear and what's not in the writing, right? If in one production you're like, oh, my intention is here, and we're like going here, and it's like, okay, what's up? But if that happens multiple times, you're like, there's a problem with what I'm putting down. You know, I have to clarify this. And then also in the second production that we right now are having at East West Players, but I've just had in this time where it will air, is that my concerns were really different. I mean, luckily that we thought we did pretty great in the first production. So it was like, there's no seismic things that I was like, oh no, second act doesn't work, right? And sometimes that happens. And there was like little zhuzhing, but now, you know, there are things I want to look at before the third production as well. It's also a dream because it is a two-hander, and then also there's some, without giving it away, there is some variability in that. And so having that different productions choose that variability or not in production and cast size was really beautiful to see. And also just feeling how different companies work. Like, especially, I mean, East West has been a home for me for a long time. That was I understudied there right out of college. It was my first equity gig. I know, it's amazing. And then actually Scott Takeda, who's the star of SUMO, like him and I met understudying there. And so like I've taught for East West for a long time. I wrote SUMO in their writers group. Like it feels very much like a homecoming. And I've produced with them before, but it was a site specific piece. So I haven't been in the theater before. And also my partner was in this show. And so that was really special for me too, to get to work with him. But it's great. I mean, yeah, the design, it's great. You know, I also, you know, I think I'm getting better as I go on in writing. So I really wanted to write this to be able to be produced because and so I wanted to write something that you could have a giant budget and make this beautiful thing. And then you could have a really small budget and make this beautiful thing, right? Even in terms of no costume changes or 10 costumes, not 10, but, multiple costumes. So in some ways that was embodied in these last two productions, not in a huge way. It wasn't like, one had 10 times the budget of the other, but there was a significant difference in capacity, and both of them did such beautiful things. And the design team, I think in both ways, I was so moved. Like Andrew Hungerford, he is the AD of No Theater of Cincinnati, but he's also a lighting designer, and he was the scenic designer for this. And so the way the lights and the set spoke to each other, I thought was so beautiful. But then in this production at East West, there was also a really beautiful conversation with Yi Chen Lee and Sue. I'm forgetting Sue's last name. I think it starts with a W, but their conversation of lights and set was also like so incredible. And so that makes me feel really proud in this way that like I'm also providing a platform for beauty that I have not even dreamed of to happen, if that makes sense. And that's what's great about theater, is that like the writer is only some of it, right? And then they're like the branches of the tree, and then all the flowers and all the leaves come on, and you're like, I could not have made that. Even in the writing, like the workshop process, right? Like by the time something is good enough for production, on my end, I'm a little like, I couldn't write that myself, right? Because it's me plus me plus me plus me over many years, plus everybody who's touched it and given feedback and breathed into it. And in that way, this is sort of labyrinthian, but I think theater can talk about like death and time in a way no other art can, because of the way it moves through people, because of its ephemerality.
Yeah, absolutely. And the play does it in such a beautiful way, in such a delicate way, I think. It's the essential, the core of theater is about ghosts and time and mortality, right? That's actually our essential subject, which is why I don't want to sound nerdy for a second, but what the heck? It's okay to be nerdy about this. Is why I think Beckett is so important, because I think that Beckett understood that in a way. I was teaching a class the other day, and I said, we're still kind of responding to Beckett, because Beckett understood something so clearly about what theater does. And he also paved a different kind of way for that to happen, in terms of structure, in terms of thinking about design, in terms of thinking about what character means or doesn't mean, and I still feel like, there's an incredible lesson in his work. It's also, of course, inimitably his, you know what I mean? Like, it was so much of his part of his vision, but I also think there's lessons there for us to still learn from. That it's kind of like a roadmap in modern drama of like, there's a world of modern drama before Beckett, and then there's a world of modern drama after that. And I still think we're contending with that. And I think sometimes I was half joking with a colleague the other day about, I kind of don't understand wanting to go back, like, unless you're going way back to ritual, right? Like, I don't kind of understand, like, once somebody has said, boom, let's do this, here's a way forward, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, let's go forward, right? And I feel like theater is always in this relationship around, shall we go forward? Again, it sort of relates to some things I was saying earlier about the slowness of theater. Like, if there are advances made, there's kind of people that blaze a trail, and then there's like, oh, I don't know, was that too much? Shall we go back? Ooh, like deer in the headlights, kind of mentality around our industry. But at the same time, it's like, oh my God, take that amazing challenge and build on it, because I think it's something beautiful that can happen, and who knows where it can lead, down the pike. So it's something I think about a lot. SUMO, however. Okay, I want to know, well, how did this play come to be? I mean, first of all, a play with sumo wrestling, about sumo wrestlers. Tell me all the things. I'm so curious, because it just seems so unlikely, maybe because I knew Kairos first, in terms of on the page. So Simo seems like, whoa, what? I mean, you're still like amazing you, but yeah, how did this play happen? I want to know all the things.
So I'm like, you're so smart. I'm like, I need to take your class, Caridad, about Beckett. But well, okay, this relates to like my sort of origin story as a writer. So because I'm an actor as well, and not really anymore, because writing and directing is moving my life in this strong way. But I became a writer because my mom passed away, and my father had also passed away. So my first play was called Death Play, because I'm obvious. And that was a solo show. But this all relates to that, because I bought a ticket, and I'm Yonsei, so 4th gen or 3rd gen, depending on how you're counting, half Japanese. And so the day after my mom passed away, I bought a ticket to Japan. And so 2 weeks later, I was in Japan, right? And I was like, and I was there for a month, and I saw sumo wrestling, and it was like, do you know the poem Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner? So it's like there are certain experiences in life. Sometimes they happen in theater where you are living in black and white, but you don't realize you are. You sort of subtly start dying to yourself. And then all of a sudden you breathe, and all of a sudden the world is like Technicolor again. And you're like, oh, and it's like you come up for air, and you feel the spark of aliveness or imagination or beauty or love or whatever. And I feel like watching sumo was like one of those moments, because of the way that it felt so much. There's so much ritual when you go to Japan and see it. And I've seen it in like Los Angeles. I've seen it in America. And it's still really cool that it feels like a sport. And to me, It is a sport in Japan, but it broke my paradigm of what sport is, because it's so filled with ritual and culture and energy and old stuff. Like the first sumo wrestlers did it in front of shrines, like Shinto shrines, for good harvests, and they throw salt, and there's prayer involved. There's like these things that they do. And it just felt, and also because it was my first time in Japan, I was connecting with like I went to where my grandfather was born, kind of thing. I was feeling that it just felt to me, I can count the number of times I've seen theater that has let me breathe. Like I can be like, when I went to Jerusalem on Broadway, when I saw the show at Soho Rep, I also like walked through the streets and was like sobbing, And so it felt, it's very strange because, this thing, it does seem unlike me in many ways. And also I think that there's something religious about my relationship with artwork, and there's something very spiritual and devotional about this sport, and also Japanese practice in general. Like you look at calligraphy, you look at sushi chefs, you look at bunraku, and like they give their lives to something. And so these sumo wrestlers, like I felt like I didn't know this because I've done research after it, they've given their lives to this thing. And so then years later, I still had not written, I had written one full-length play on my own. I had written, I'd co-written a show, wrote my solo show, and I was trying an adaptation, but I'd written one play. And then I was like, let me apply to the MacDowell. So I was like, I just wrote like this thing, like I want to write about sumo wrestlers, and wrote a thing, and I got picked up. And in a way, I mean, I have as you can probably glean, I have a relationship with the unconscious and my spiritual life. So in a way, looking back, I also felt like I was writing into the masculine as a non-male person, thinking about my, they talk about anima and animus, thinking about your other side, right? And also as a person who grew up in such a way that I was afraid of men, And so in a way, I feel like I was trying to learn to understand men. And weirdly enough, I know this sounds corny, but in a way, like it's really healed my heart. And also because in the production, in the workshops and the production, like I'm around a lot of men and non-binary people and women, like I'm around all kinds of people, but there's a very masculine energy to the production, the cast, and all of that. And so in a way, it's like healed my heart in that way. I've learned to love the masculine. And it's made me, right? In looking to my other and writing about my other. And in the play too, it's weird because they become men through their devotion to the feminine spirit of this craft. And so it's funny because I'm still really into it, but not in the same way. Like I'm not rooting for a specific, whenever I watch sports, I'm not like rooting for a specific team, but I love watching it for the other reasons.
Thank you so much for that. Fascinating, and I didn't know any of the background to how the play happened. I remember production. You might find reviews of it online somewhere because everything somewhere lives online. But Lee Brewer did a production of The Tempest at the Delacorte Theater in New York. With Raul Julia playing Prospero, but he had sumo wrestlers in the show. And that show was so amazing. I remember seeing it, like I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who Lee Brewer was. I was a kid. I was like, this play is like weird and wild. There were sumo wrestlers and there were like punk singers and Raul Julia being like, beautiful and gorgeous and amazing and sensual. And but it was like, the aerials, he split the aerials. So the aerials were like, I think 5 or 4 aerials, if I'm remembering correctly, but you'll figure out if you see the review. So some of them were sumo wrestlers. Wow. And it was like, and it was intense, it was like, oh, wow, like what, and I just remember being mesmerized and also thinking, how did he come up with this? Like, it was just such a radical idea. Do you know what I mean? And Lee, I think because of, his own kind of iconoclastic work, but, he was always interested, I think, in a lot of his work in mashing up different genres and also ways of performing,
Yeah.
because these wrestlers were not actors. So it was also like, people who are not actors who suddenly are like speaking Shakespeare, so yeah, it was super cool. So, but I haven't seen a play since that deals with, so I was so excited when I read about yours, and I was like, what? A play, sumo, I'm all in. It's super cool. I wanted to ask a question for you as a writer. And I don't know if this is influenced by your directing work, so I'm sort of curious, is whether you seem to start impulsively, but I wonder if you also start, it's not an either or, but I think some writers start like from a conceptual formal level, and some writers are like, I don't know, I'm just writing, and blah blah blah, and I wonder where you fall in that, and if the conceptual is something that leads your process, or yeah, where do you sit with that?
It's funny. I mean, I think that there's like in screenwriting, they say there are architects and there are gardeners. There's people who are just like, what grows here? And there's people who are like, ding, ding, ding. I think because I've written more for screens lately in the past 2 or 3 years, then it's sort of changing. I'm becoming better at structure as my, sort of thinking about it first. But I have a very specific process that relies on silence. So I'm actually I am going to do it this weekend, which is like my ideal world. I'll take a day of silence a month, sometimes more. And then twice a year, I'll take 4 to 6 days. And sometimes, it's amazing. I go to this hermitage in Big Sur and like look out over the sea. But sometimes I'll just do it in my house. Like the key to it is like turning off the electronics and just writing by hand. And sometimes I don't write at all. Like, I just sit there, and then that's usually when the first work comes. And sometimes it's an outline. I usually follow-ish that outline. Like I'll outline, and then that'll give me sort of fodder to write scenes, and then it'll how it goes. But in that way, my work comes in a very flow state. And sometimes that comes very abstract or very like idea based. Sometimes that comes imagistic. Sometimes that comes as dialogue. Kairos came as dialogue. So I remember I was in the writer's room and I hadn't written. So I was like, day of silence. And then I wrote like 25 pages that are very similar to the first 25 pages. And weirdly enough, Kairos, usually I write, because I work this way in an intuitively like, Chris Bay is the clown teacher. He's like, you can't walk a cat. You got to let the cat walk you. I feel this way about writing. So I'm like letting the cat walk me. But what was weird with Kairos is that usually I write a play and I'll write like 100 pages. And then I'll be like, okay, that's what the play is about. And I'll cut 70 and then write from there. But with Kairos, I was sort of like, I think this is what this is about the whole time, where I've changed things, but much less significantly than anything else. And honestly, probably because it's a two-hander, so you kind of can grok what's going on. And I think every play comes different. So like there's a play that when I was at McDowell, I wrote in a week and a half, and I was like, I don't know if this plays, because I've never written, like that's wild for me. And I was like, maybe this doesn't get any traction. And then it's getting a little traction lately. I was like, okay, so maybe this is an okay play. Like it's a weird thing. But I'm hoping, I think I'm getting a little better at structure. So I hope I can lead with that more, because it's certainly inefficient the way I write. Although I love it for what it is, because it does, I mean, this, but I think a writer who's like really working something out for themselves, you can feel it in a play versus a didactic play, which is like, I think this, let me just put it on the page. It's like someone who's thinking with the page or feeling with the page. So in that way, there has to be some mystery involved, because it's like the play lets me be different. And if it doesn't do something to me, how's it going to do something to anyone else?
Totally. Oh my gosh, I know. There's that thing of like being moved by the work or letting the work move you, and also there's also something about just chasing the mysterious part of, you know what I mean? I think in our business, a little bit, this. I mean, we're asked to pitch things all the time and kind of like predict what we're going to make as artists. And but actually, you can do that. It's fine. But actually, it's sometimes it's like the weird thing that you're attracted to, or like, I don't know, I want to write about snails, and the snails might tell me something. And slowly that metaphor becomes something kind of potent, right? Like that
Yeah.
thing that was just this weird hunch that you're following is actually responding, quote, to the moment, or whatever, however people describe stuff. But it's very hard to convince people that that weird hunch that you have means something. Do you know what I mean? Because I think there's this expectation sometimes in, the world of funding or artist statements, or however you describe project proposals, where they want to see the thing. You know what I mean? Like, what is the thing? What does it look like? And I was like, I don't know, but like the snails are really cool. Like, you know what I mean? And that seems goofy, but at the same time, I think, what is that quote by Laurie Anderson? There's something about like plays. There's a couple of things. Not play. She's talking about music and art, but she says an essential component to art making is silliness. That you have to kind of have some aspect of the silly when you're making something. And sometimes that silly thing is sometimes what I'm not going to presume with you, Lisa, but I feel like sometimes as theater makers, we get drummed that out of us. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't be so silly. Like, what's that silly thing you're doing? It's like, well, maybe that silly thing is kind of important, and honor that, please, So I'm glad you mentioned Chris Bayes, and I think that is sort of, I've been thinking a lot about clowning, and I've been thinking a lot about like that the clowns of the world can help us. You know what I mean? I think the clowns are going to teach us things. And I see it a lot in the climate movement. There's this whole movement in the climate crisis of clowns, people who actually go at the subject through clowning as a way of making it effective for, in terms of communication, but also that it's a way of kind of seducing an audience, a way of kind of enchanting them. And you're thinking about silly things and people are acting up or whatever the clowning. There's dark clowning, also, but then that's a way in. Right. And so it's something I've just been like, it's on my mind. And I also think that formal concerns can be playful. You know what I mean? That the formal concern can be, as simple as, I don't know, like, is it shaped like hexagonal, and like, oh, what does a like hexagonal play look like? Do you know what I mean? And that's like a playful impulse, but that's also a conceptual one, right? And then you can plug into that. Well, what if it's hexagonal? What kind of story? Is there a story? Like, and what is it? And who lives in that hexagonal space? And like, how do they move in that? All those questions that you ask when you do world building. So it's just something that's been on my mind. I wanted to we're almost at the end of our time. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, no fair. Which is to say, I wonder what dreams you have for the field or even for your own practice. Or if that's too personal, then maybe we can go to a question about, you're moving away from acting and going into more and more into writing and directing. And so, yeah, you pick. I'll leave it open to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to touch that, but something you said really moved me. Like whenever I take a clown class, I'm laughing, but I'm also sobbing in my car and I'm yelling in my car. It like opens, it creates such breath in me that I have to feel more of my life. And there's this play by Rinna Groff called Ruby Sunrise. Do you know it? And there's this monologue that I did when I was like doing monologues, in your 20s when you're auditioning for things, where this girl is inventing television and she's convincing her aunt that she's like, if I can just send a piece of light from here to there, then I'm going to create TV basically. And then she was like, this is going to be the end of war, because who could see war in your own home? If you could actually see it. And this was basically, I should have said this in like the turn of the century, like 1900 or something. So she was like, if I invent television, there's no way that we could see what is going on in this world and then not absolutely stop it. And so in this way, I mean, I like thinking, and then how sad it is now because we get images of destruction all the time. And so there's this thing, in terms of climate devastation, it's like there's something in our humanity that is not, and mine too, right? I compartmentalize all the time, but there is something going on where like, if we could breathe and feel a little more, then all of a sudden everyone would just be like, no, we're not going to do this, right? And so there's also this part of us to like, can we change our breath? Can we breathe more to touch the sorrow and all the other feelings we would feel that would make change necessary, that would foment our shifting the world. And that being said, as an artist, personally or like globally?
Both, either, you pick. Yeah.
I mean, there's something that my friends do, the Susan Lurie Parks like write with me thing on Mondays, and I haven't done it. I like have a meeting on Mondays, and she consistently reminds people that they are free. And I think there's a piece of me that has lived. There's some things going on in my career, including the Tow Foundation Writer in Residence, but some opportunities that mean like I've been a freelance artist for many years, but I think I'm going to be okay. Meaning like, I think I'll be able to stay an artist for the rest of my life. And, for the last decade, it would always be like, I don't know about next year. Right. And so that feeling of safety that is coming upon as I like tip into being mid-career, hopefully, is a balm to my spirit. And I realize is the basis of freedom in some ways for me. Like there's the substrate of safety. And so that's what I pray for, because I can feel myself be wilder with my imagination and be more earnestly curious if I felt like I could just do what was interesting to me as opposed to trying to hustle to survive. And in that way, I think providing artists with more space for that, of course, this is a giant problem. I don't know how to fix it, but providing artists for space to think about themselves not as the commodities they make, but as a thinker and a perceiver of the world. There's so many artists I know who are so upset when they're not making work. And I'm like, the inhale, the yin, the reception is also such a big part about being a person that expresses humanity. And so there's things like going to McDowell and Yaddo have helped me do that. Like I was so amazed. They just kind of give you space and they're like, you don't like write a book report at the end. And so it was wild the way that changed me in a way I didn't even know I needed to be changed.
Yeah, what a beautiful response, and thanks for articulating that. We're at the end of our conversation today. Hopefully not the end of our conversation, but formally for Conversations from the Alcove, this is the end of the episode. For those of you out there, whenever you receive this, thank you for watching. Stay tuned with the conversations, follow the series. This will be part of the second season, catch up with the first season. Listen to, these wonderful theater makers thinking deeply about their art, their craft, and the world at a very unique time, I think, that the world is in. So also it feels kind of important with a big I, but also with a small I. And I will say my goodbyes here, but I will stay online after I hit end recording and do my offline goodbyes with Lisa. So long for now. Catch up with Conversations and see you on the next episode. And for now, I'm going to hit end recording.